Hi everyone, welcome back to the Novel Nomad and welcome to my Canada and America haul video. I did quite a lot of book shopping when I was in Canada and the US. I was in Vancouver, Victoria, a few bookstores, Vancouver Island. I didn't really do that much shopping in the Canadian Rockies though, and then I was in Portland in the US, and of course I visited Powell's Books. So I did get quite a number of books. So what I'm recommending is that you pause the video, go make yourself a cup of tea, because I cannot guarantee that this is going to be a short video by any standard. Alright, I'm going to let that. Today I'm enjoying a French green tea in my lovely Powell's mug, of which a merchandise I brought back with me as well. It has the very adorable umbrella design on the other side. But let's get into the book, shall we? We're not here just for the tea. So this is in no particular order because it is in no particular order. Starting off, I picked up Roots, which by Tara O'Connor. It is a graphic novel. I found this one at a secondhand store in Victoria, which has an amazing amount of bookstores, may I just add. But yeah, this one seems really good. It's about a girl who's reached a crossroads in her life and she decides to discover her family history in Ireland, and she's from the US. So this sounds really fun. Next, I absolutely had to get the latest Sarah MacLean, Brazen and the Beast. I adore Sarah MacLean. Her romance books are top shelf quality, amazing characters, amazing plot. So emotionally charged every time. This is her latest one. I have yet to read the first one, actually. I'm a little bit behind, but this one apparently is receiving all the love on the romance readers community, and so I just had to get it. Victoria in Canada Darling, and that is Essie Eugene. She wrote Washington Black, which I read and loved this year, and this is her observations on home, so I thought that was perfect since she lives in Victoria where I was visiting, and it's called Dreaming of Elsewhere. I believe it's a collection of poetry and a few little shorts, but otherwise it looks fabulous. Next, we have a short story collection I picked up from Window Seat Books. This was in Nanaimo on our way back to Victoria after our road trip around Vancouver Island, and it's called Bad Endings by Carolee Baker. Now, I believe the author herself is First Nations and Icelandic, and she lives in a reserve in just outside of Vancouver. So I thought this was really, really good to pick up. 1, First Nations writer, 2, short story collection, and 3, it located in BC. That was a perfect selection. Next, I picked up Laura Dean Keith's Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki. Now this is a graphic novel that's been getting all the love lately, and it is, I think it's LGBTQ representative, which is really, really great. I do love what graphic novels do with LGBTQ stories. So much emotion in there, but this has been getting a lot of hype and a lot of love, and I really wanted to pick it up, and I found it in a beautiful little bookstore called Mermaid's Tales in Tofino. The other book I picked up in Mermaid's Tales was The Seven Fallen Feathers. This is actually a true crime about First Nations youth who committed suicide in Canada, and just looking into the circumstances that surrounded that, because that is a huge problem over there within those communities. So fantastic First Nations history, local history, First Nations true crime, and also looking into prevalent problems within the society. Keeping in Vancouver Island, I picked up Kings, Queens and In-Betweens by Tanya Boyden. This is also by a Vancouver Canadian author, and it's such a great cover. I love it. It's YA, and of course it's dealing with LGBTQ themes, and it just looks so much fun. So we are continuing my bee obsession. If you don't know, I have suddenly become, not suddenly, I'd say within the last few years, very much obsessed with bees, hence the top. I do love bees and nature, writing about bees, and Dave Goulson I discovered through his almost biographical sting in the tail where he just reiterates his love of bees and how he grew into becoming an expert in them. And this is his book Buzz in the Meadow. This is actually a second-hand copy, so yes for second-hand. I found this at Russell's Books in Victoria. I love Russell's Books. Definitely go. It has so many layers. It will be coming up in my book lover's guide to BC. But definitely really want to get into more of Dave Goulson's writing. So we have a rather hilarious pickup. I got this once again in Russell's Books. This is down in the vintage section and it's in children's classics. So it is called Tanglewood Tales and it's by Nathaniel Hawthorne, author of the Scarlet Letter. And he did for children a reiteration of Greek tales. But what's fabulous about this one is that it was illustrated by a 1970s or 60s illustrator, and just look at that level of detail. I love it. The details go all the way through as well, but just that cover was stunning and sold me. And also Nathaniel Hawthorne I need to read more of, and kids lit is always a great way to get into some classic writers. Another amazing find in Russell's Books in Victoria was East Lynne by Mrs. Henry Wood, I should say. Now, this got me ridiculously excited for Victober, which is incredibly soon. So soon. I'm so ready. My Victober TBR is already out, but this got me so excited. I'm not reading this one for the Victober this year. I think I want to take my time because it is quite an old copy and I don't want to be cutting it around everywhere during the month. So I think it's going to be a slow read. Perhaps I'll select another month and just dedicate my time to reading this one slowly. But such a beautiful edition of East Lynne. Next we have Richard Wagamasi, Medicine Walk. He is a First Nations writer, incredibly well-known First Nations writer in Canada, of which I have yet to see any of his work in Australia, but one that was recommended enough in enough bookstores around Canada that I had to pick up. Medicine Walk is the first one in I'm not sure of a duology or a series, but it sounds like it's going to be a very strong and emotional read. So I think the next lot is my haul from Powell's. Best thing about Powell's is they actually ship back to Australia, so I didn't even have to think about my suitcase weight going into this. I literally went crazy. So be prepared. Probably have another sip of tea before it goes cold. Excellent stuff. Alright, so going into my Powell's book haul, and we're starting off with Ziggy, Stardust and Me. Now, this is an LGBTQ book. It just came out when I got there. It's by James Braddon, and I had recently finished I Wish You All the Best, so I was in the mood for more LGBTQ reads, especially with YA, just to see how different the sphere is, because I think it felt like it was dominated by Simon versus the Homo sapiens for quite a long time. So I really like these very different stories, LGBTQ stories coming out, definitely in YA. Speaking of Nathaniel Hawthorne, I picked up this adorable edition of Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. Now this is Rhodes Publishing Group. I have their copy of, I believe, The Devil's Dictionary and Frankenstein, and I really love just the simplicity of their designs. That circle in the middle with all the detail of the cover, and then that white and the colour. I think Frankenstein is by far, it's probably my favourite cover for Frankenstein. It has the ice and it's all blue and it's amazing. So I picked up this one because they're incredibly hard to get in Australia, and this was super cheap in comparison. Next are two books that I definitely cannot get from my local bookseller in Australia, and that is Fanny Burney. Now I read Fanny Burney's Evelina, and that was a favourite of Jane Austen. So this is a late Georgian writer. She is a fascinating person in her own right, but I haven't been able to get my hands on her other works besides Evelina, which just seems to be everywhere, so you can't quite escape it. But there is Cecilia and Camilla. I don't know too much about these stories, but when I saw these editions, which are both gorgeous, I had to pick it up because there is so much difficulty surrounding getting these books. I knew I would want to read them, even though they're ginormous. Oh my goodness, Evelina's so short in comparison. But I'm excited to read them, more Fanny Burney, and getting into more late Georgian writing actually. As I mentioned earlier of my bee craze, I picked up the copy of Global Hive by Horst Kornberger. This is about what the bee crisis teaches us about the sustainable world. Obviously, bees are incredibly important to the ecosystem and especially our food production for many things, and also flowers and things like that. So their pollination, incredibly important pollinators. But obviously with the current climate issues, they, like many other creatures around the world, are suffering because of climate change, and this is like essential reading. So besides my future desire to be a beekeeper, I knew I'd have to read some of this about seeing how bees fit into the climate crisis at the moment. I was quite excited to find that the new Daisy Dalrymple was actually published around the time that I was in the US. I am collecting the US editions of Daisy Dalrymple because they do these amazing illustrated covers. There's just so much detail to this. Unfortunately, the earlier ones are slowly every year or every few months are being released in this style, but the later ones I am keeping up to date, even though I haven't got to them yet because I think there's about 20 something now. But I am definitely collecting all of the Daisy Dalrymples just because I find her such a fabulous murder mystery character. Next we have Daphne du Maurier's Julius. Now this is an interesting one because obviously you hear about Rebecca, Jamaican Inn, My Cousin Rachel, but Julius? I haven't heard Julius before. It is published by Virago. I know they're releasing most of her works now, but Julius really intrigued me. It sounds like a very different plot for Daphne du Maurier, but I just love her writing style. She knows how to keep the reader completely entranced in her writing and her plot. So I really want to see how she goes with having a male main character and how he fits into it. I think he's going to be one of those devious people that you just cannot like, but you want to know what happens anyway. So a poetry collection that was receiving a little bit of hype in the store, I mean when I say a little bit I mean a lot, and that is If They Come For Us by Fatima Ashgur. And I've seen this actually in Australia now, which is great, but I saw this. It's got such a beautiful cover. It's about a woman seeking her own identity, being a young contemporary Pakistani woman living in America. So I thought this was essential reading, not only for diverse voices, but poetry is always a really interesting way to get very deep emotions across. Next we have a book I was so excited to find at Powell's, and that is 3 Day Road by Joseph Boyden. Now I do have Joseph Boyden's Render, and I think that's the only one I have of his, but 3 Day Road kept being recommended, but I was quite picky because I wanted this exact cover and I didn't know if I was going to be able to find it, but I did. It's got the feathers, which were incredibly important to the plot going by the blurb, and so I thought when a cover can tie in so well with the actual story itself, that's the one you want. So 3 Day Road by Joseph Boyden was such a find. I gasped. I did gasp in the store, but I was probably doing that quite a lot because I got so excited. It's quite cold today, so this is amazing tea right now. Only 3 more to go for my Powers book haul, I promise. Now, the next one was rather depressing considering it's got a dead bee on it. Like, look at that tiny little baby thing. But it's called The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming. So once again, going into the climate change issue that is kind of happening right now. The climate strikes were just Friday just gone past. So that's when I'm filming this. It's very much present in the social media spectrum. But David Wallace Wells, this was receiving so much hype when we were in Powell's. I have heard of it before, but I decided to pick it up because 1, it was on special, and 2, it just felt really right to go into my passion for bees and passion for nature writing, really trying to understand current climate issues. Okay, this was such a find. This is the Olive editions. For some reason I am in love with the Olive editions. Who are they published by? Harper Perennial Olive Editions. I only have one other one, but I love their designs. They do different colours. They come out every year, and it's a really limited release, only around for like a few years. But this is The Orchardist by Amanda Copland. This is recommended so many times around Pals, and I think it's more of a American classic, but I think it's a West Coast American classic from what the story was. It's a female-led historical fiction, and I am excited to find out more, but also I love this. I love these editions. I don't usually collect them for all of them because I only buy the books if I'm interested in reading them, but I definitely recommend checking out the Olive Editions and seeing if any of your favourites are there and if you'd like to collect them yourself. Alright, as promised, the last book from Pals. I do have one other one after that, but last book from Pals is My Puny Sorrows by Miriam Taos. Before I left Canada and I did my little Canadian TBR, so many people recommended Miriam Taos, and this this edition is just beautiful. I know it doesn't quite match in the latest editions that they've just released, but I think it's just so beautiful, and it's such a disjointed characters everywhere and how they're moving. It's a very interesting cover, but yeah, so I went with all your recommendations. Thank you so much, and I kept looking out for a really interesting edition, and I found it in Pals. So I'm looking forward to reading Miriam Taos and into more Canadian fiction. Alright, the last book, I promise, the last book I bought in the US was The Hobbit by Jrr Tolkien. Now, yes, I already have a copy of The Hobbit. It's the copy I read when I was about 8, and I just had to buy this book. This was in a tiny little bookstore. Well, it wasn't even a bookstore. It was a bit of a second-hand eclectic store, and he just happened to have this amazing edition of The Hobbit. It was published, I think, in the 60s or 70s, but just look, the quality is stunning, and it has it's all got the green colouring through it, and there are the illustrations, like Tolkien's illustrations, colour illustrations, had these beautiful page layouts to them. And there it is again. So I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful edition. I'm just trying to find when it was published. When were you published? So this one was in fact published in 1966. So quite early on. I think it's still 30 years after The Hobbit was originally published. But it's such a lovely edition. I just had to get it to add it to my shelves because one, so shiny, and two, to have it in this beautiful leather cover as well is just such a keepsake, such a treasure. And the guy at this store was really lovely, and he actually found this at a store further down in Sacramento in the US, so it's traveled a very long way, but I get to keep it now because it's so beautiful. Alright, I think we did good. My tea is at perfect temperature, so I can go finish it off with quite wonderful enjoyment and keep myself quite warm on this rather cold spring day. And I hope you enjoyed my Canadian and US book haul. I will be doing one for Paris and the UK, so be sure to look out for that. I will just have to wait because I did post some books back, and I'm just waiting for them to come in. But the Canadian and US ones thankfully came straight away, so I was able to share them with you. So if you've read any of these books or would like to know a little bit more about them, about any of the bookstores that I purchased them at, let me know down below, and I'll see you next time. I hope you enjoyed your tea and happy reading. Bye!